I'm George Galloway, and I present كلمة on Al-Mayadeen television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. كلمة means free word. That's what I speak. So كلمة is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Al-Mayadeen television. Welcome to كلمة coming to you from London on Al-Mayadeen television with me, George Galloway, and with an audience of distinguished experts and one or two enthusiastic amateurs, including me. Although I come to you with the dust of the general election campaign trail on my boots. I'm a candidate in the British general election, which is just about to begin. For complicated reasons, I've been campaigning for weeks, but that's another matter. The big match has begun. Quite unexpectedly, Theresa May strode out into the early morning sunshine in Downing Street and announced that all previous announcements were cancelled. 5 times in as many weeks, she had ruled out an early British general election. And indeed, the law precluded one because the very same Conservative Party and their then Liberal Democrat allies had passed a law to make it illegal for any Prime Minister to call an early general election, though that was very quickly dispensed with. The proximate cause was that the Labour opposition, led by Jeremy Corbyn, was so far behind in the opinion polls that it seemed a walkover was in the offing. The probable actual reason was that a number of serious criminal charges might have been about to be pressed by the prosecuting authorities in England about overspending by the Conservative Party in up to 20, maybe even 24 parliamentary seats in the last general election in 2015. And if that had happened, and if those cases had gone to court, and if the members of Parliament had been found guilty, a lot of ifs in that, I know, then there would have been by-elections in each and every seat where miscreant behaviour had been uncovered. That would have been death by 1,000 cuts for Theresa May, the British Prime Minister. I say her name because out in the Middle East you might not have grasped yet that she is the leader of once proud Albion. It's been a very bad start for her general election campaign. She's helicoptering around the country at our expense, I have no doubt, at least in significant part, refusing to meet the other candidates in televised debates, as has been the norm in recent times in Britain and most other developed countries where television has caught on. She is refusing to meet the public, appearing at stage-managed events with hand-picked audiences that are allowed to ask no difficult questions. Jeremy Corbyn may have weaknesses as a leader, particularly on the floor of Parliament, but the one thing no one could deny, he's very strong on the street. He's very strong as a campaigner, and that's exactly what he has been doing. He's been out and about on the streets, literally without any kind of cover or stage management, with all the difficulties that that can sometimes bring, because that's the only way that he can begin to claw back some of the ground that exists between him and the Conservative government. The Prime Minister wants to make it a Brexit election, an election about who's best able to be trusted with delivering the decision that the British people made in the referendum to leave the European Union. She knows that Labour has a real problem on that issue. Millions of their voters are in favour of Brexit. almost all of their members of parliament are against it, and indeed a significant part of their membership too. The Liberal Democrats, once 57 members of parliament, now 8, once led by the Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, now led by a kind of evangelical weirdo who just hours ago, before I came into the studio, sacked one of his key parliamentary candidates for standing up for the Palestinian people. He's not prepared to opine on the sinfulness of people's personal behaviour, but it ain't no sin to kill Palestinians for the Liberal Democrat leader Tim Farron. But they're in the race because they are offering a second referendum on Brexit and hoping to capitalise on the 48% of the people who voted against Brexit in the EU referendum. Only two other things to say before throwing it to my distinguished audience. The first is that the British media, particularly the state broadcaster, the government mouthpiece, the once upon a time proud BBC, has plumbed entirely new depths in the run-up to this election and in the beginning of the campaign. They would be as well announcing that what they were about to say was the chosen word of the British government itself. It is utterly shocking the way that the British media, all the television stations and virtually all the newspapers, with perhaps one exception, which is supporting Labour in the way that the rope supports the hanging man, are gunning for Jeremy Corbyn, which raises quite an interesting question. If Corbyn was so weak and so far behind and with absolutely no chance of winning, why are they all expending so much energy trying further to destroy him? Perhaps they're afraid that he might just pull a rabbit out of the hat, as we say in Britain, in the general election, which is on June the 8th. And the last point that has to be made, especially for an international audience, since the day and hour that Jeremy Corbyn was chosen as the leader of the Labour Party, almost all of his members of Parliament have been sitting behind him with a knife in their hand, stabbing him in the back, in the Parliament, on television, and to anyone who would listen. So, insofar as the Labour leader starts this campaign in a weak position, it is the followers of Tony Blair and the War Party, the pro-Israel party, that have left him in this enfeebled condition. That's my take. That's my kalima horra, my free word. Let's hear from some of the other ladies and gentlemen here who may, and indeed are welcome to, have a very different point of view. Sir.
I totally agree with you in terms of the way that the election has been called by Theresa May. But I would like also to add, it is actually what is coming down the pipeline in economic slowdown. It's most definitely, reading the figures and reading what is the economic performance at the moment for the British economy, is going to be extremely difficult for Theresa May to justify her policies and austerity, especially when the economy starts slowing down, which would affect employment and standard of living and so on and so forth. To add to this, Theresa May could not take a chance to wait until 2019 or 2020 for the election, according to the last law that you mentioned, because she doesn't know what the outcome of the negotiation would be with Europe. It might actually be a complete farce, to which might reflect on her possibility to succeed in a 2020 election. So I think she cut a run. Do we believe Theresa May when she said that no election, no 5 times, as you mentioned? No, we don't. Theresa May also voted in that very law herself in 2010 and supported the enshrine of it in British law, but she still went ahead despite her assurances right across the last 4 or 5 weeks that she would not call a general election. But also to address the issue of the Labour Party. The Labour Party have already decided who's the leader of that party. I agree with you, there is some dissension from certain parts of the MPs, but I think in general, if you look across the country and across the different constituency, you would see that the constituents are now coming together and support the Labour Party. We would like to fight the election on our turf, on our ground, and that is a better standard of living for everybody, equality, which seemed to be a word that used by the Conservative but not acted upon. We also like to support those who need the support, our support, working together to actually address the needy rather than just addressing the greedy. So there is an issue here, and I just want also, just before I conclude this bit, is that Trump has actually won his election against all the prediction that like him or hate him, he has won his election despite the prediction that he would not. And I think Jeremy Corbyn will, as you said, pull the rabbit out of the hat.
Well, very loyal as a Labour man, but I have to contest 1 or 2 of the points that you make. You say that the Labour Party is pulling together, but that's not true. Tony Blair, the aforementioned, has been on television several times urging people not necessarily to vote Labour, but to vote for anti-Brexit candidates, whichever party they are from. Peter Mandelson, the former arch-wizard right-hand man of Tony Blair, has been doing the same. A number of members of Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party have stood down, announced that they are not going to contest the election, and in so doing were firing their last shots at Corbyn as they left. Some of the people who are actually standing again as Labour candidates are still saying, they could hardly change their tune, that Jeremy Corbyn does not deserve to be Prime Minister. I could give you 4 members of Parliament, but their names would mean nothing to the international audience. I'm really not sure that Labour's going to reach the end of it in one piece. Now, a very distinguished journalist catches my eye. Jonathan.
Well, I want to agree very much with the previous speaker that this is a cut-and-run election. I think Theresa May is afraid that the economy is going downhill, and it's going downhill because of Brexit, in my view. The pound has gone down, which is causing prices of imported goods to go up. There's inflation seeping in. Real wages are going down. Investment is being cut in this country by companies that are afraid of the consequences of Brexit. And I think that Labour should have taken the challenge of Theresa May when she says it's a Brexit election, and they should have put anti-Brexit as a central part of their platform. As you pointed out in the beginning, 2/3 of Labour Party voters were for remaining in the European Union. They were against Brexit. Particularly young people were in a large majority in favour of staying in the European Union. I think it is a disaster for us to leave, and I think Theresa May is trying to stop that option because she fears, and I think it's a real fear, a genuine fear, because it will probably happen, that the public will turn even more strongly against Brexit over the next few years as the negotiations continue, as the economy starts tanking. And I think therefore Labour should, and they still can because their manifesto has not been published, they still should stay. We will abort the negotiations, we will stop all negotiations, we will simply remain in the EU. I mean, there's a false argument going around that this referendum is sacrosanct, that it's irreversible. The verdict has been spoken as though it's for all time. But as we know, with general elections, you elect a parliament for 5 years, then the electorate has a chance to change its mind and reverse that decision 5 years later and say, we made a mistake, the wrong party was elected, we want to change parties. So why is it not possible democratically for the Labour Party to say, we stand for ending the negotiations, stopping them outright before they've really even started, and we campaign to remain in the EU, and let's put that to the electorate? I think that would be fully democratic.
That's a bold, radical, somewhat surprising from you, prospectus, but it's entirely belongs in the drawer marked, if my auntie had a beard, she'd be my uncle. The Labour Party are not going to do that, cannot do that, have said repeatedly that they accept the verdict of the referendum. You're right that no parliament can bind its successor, and in theory referenda can be held over and over again. They are, in our system, advisory. The problem is the referendum was not that long ago. And we have a parallel referenda process going on in Scotland, where all the parties say that the independence question, Scottish independence, was settled in a referendum only 2 years ago. And you can't have another one already, because that makes the referendum process meaningless. And so you'd be saying one thing about the Scottish referendum, an entirely different thing about the European referendum. You're right that 2/3 of Labour voters voted to remain in the European Union, though how many of those were warm supporters of the EU and how many lukewarm, neither of us can tell. But even at its best, that still leaves 1/3 of Labour voters who voted for Brexit. And you would be sacrificing, presumably, that 1/3, and I'm not sure that Labour can easily sacrifice 1/3 of its voting base. But a very interesting juxtaposition. Jonathan Steele, a very distinguished journalist over many decades, if you'll forgive me saying so. Yes, sir, you have the floor.
Definitely. Thank you very much, George. I would like to say the recent by-elections have shown us the position of the party many of us support, the Labour. I think they have lost their traditional stronghold, Copeland. Their majority was reduced in Stoke-on-Trent Central. Their allegiance, amongst the working class, have steadily went down. And I think in Scotland, the Labour, which was the party for the poor and the underclass, have faced the Scottish National Party, which dominated the things, and the unionist vote went to the Conservative. If we have to be realistic, George, Labour, unless they do something extraordinary, they are going to be in difficult position. I know this gentleman, Jeremy, is the right man to lead, despite all these things that has been negatively said, and I hope he is the right person to lead Labour into a victory. But the reality, Labour has also been busy in infights that has shifted the Labour Party politicians from the real thing. They lost the touch with people, and unless they do something important, they will be badly disadvantaged. For Theresa May and the Conservatives, they have sensed something, they saw something which is not in their favour, so they don't want to take the blame. They call it the elections technically, and I think the supporters of the Labour Party and whoever cares about democracy should not give up the hope. But a great work needs to be done in terms of sorting out the differences inside the Labour and preparing the people for election. Thank you.
Well, in the first round of the French presidential election, the Labour Party equivalent in France got 6% of the vote. Jeremy Corbyn is, as I speak, on 26% of the vote. 26% is 5% less than they achieved in the last general election, but it's 20 points more than their equivalent who were in power in France managed to achieve. There is an historic decline of support for establishment parties, including social democratic parties. PASOK in Greece, the Labour equivalent there, is now extinct, no longer exists. I think the French Socialist Party is also now destined for the fate of the dodo and a place on a shelf as a party that is now no longer. The working class that you describe has, of course, completely changed. When I began in politics, the Labour Party commanded the support of the great majority of working class people, and people defined themselves as working class people in tens of millions, many of whom no longer do so. But we've made a good start. There's plenty more where this came from. We'll be right back. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al-Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London, discussing the British general election, which is underway. But before we continue the studio debate, we took the camera of Al-Mayadeen onto the streets of London to hear the public's voice. Take a look at this.
Why do you think Theresa May has called an early election?
Increase the majority in Parliament.
Because she wasn't actually elected, it was because David Cameron resigned. I think it's for her own personal gains, because she kept saying to her personal spokesman that she wasn't going to actually hold one, and she's been lying, saying that it was because Parliament were blocking Article 50 or triggering Article 50 even though they weren't, so yeah.
أنا شايف إن يعني سببت في early elections عشان ياخدوا رأي الناس ويشوفوا يعني الكمية اللي هتوافق والكمية اللي هترفض.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's any secret that the UK is kind of in a panic right now, or that there are a lot of big changes happening, I guess, if you wanted to put it in a really politically correct and mild way.
I think Theresa May called an early election because she wants to secure her position in the United Kingdom to be on a firmer position to negotiate Brexit internally and externally.
I think it's for her to make sure that she has the backing of the country.
Do you think the election in June can change the Brexit situation?
I don't think so.
It might have been able to, accept Labour's still going to go against Brexit, go with Brexit, so probably not, I'd say.
No, I don't think it can. Like, the way I see it is, even though I was anti-Brexit, I think that the way, because everyone's voted for Brexit, I don't think you can really go against the referendum.
Well, if the Conservatives get a landslide victory, which could be, they could change it to make it like what they call a hard Brexit.
I would say yes if you'd asked me a year ago, but with everything that's happened in global politics recently, I don't think so.
أنا شايف هي ممكن تغير بريكسيت عشان ممكن في ناس كتيرة يقولوا لأ مثلا فيغيروا موقف ويعني يحسنوا الموقف ويشوفوا الناس عايزين ايه ويعملوا كده على أساس الناس.
Those were some of the voices of the public. Looked like it was around the School of Oriental and African Studies in central London. Let's continue with the debate here. Yes, sir, you have the floor.
Assalamualaikum, George. It's me, Amir again. What I'm going to say may sound a little bit bizarre at first, but I think in the next sort of few weeks we may see some of it unfold. First of all, I think people need to remember Theresa was a Remainer, and the only way she really knows is the Remain way for the EU, in my opinion. I believe Corbyn is the true Brexiter, and I think we've been put in a situation where one person's presenting himself as a Brexiter, and the other person's presenting himself as a partially warm Remainer, but neither of them mean it. But I believe Corbyn is the true Brexiter. And I believe Theresa, when she does get this election, if she does win it, I believe she's going to use it to make more kind of pro-EU deals and EU business deals, and really not give us the Brexit that she's saying she's going to give us on TV. I believe Corbyn will give us a more fairer, harder Brexit than what Theresa's making out. Sounds bizarre, but this is what I really think.
Go on.
And I also think that just some of the mix-up within the Labour Party, they say it's in turmoil, and that it's the same in the Tories, but they're just not showing it. So I believe there's infighting between Remain and Brexit camp in the Tory party, and I believe they want to stay Remain really, because the Remain, the EU business rules, all this, cutting standards here to allow their business rules from the EU to operate here, putting British passport holders in a position, regardless of your colour or religion or anything. And a lot of that is not being said because there's too much focus on colour and countries. But what really matters is what's best for this country. And
well, look, I don't see anything far-fetched about that at all. Theresa May is leading the Brexit party, but she was, and I believe remains, a Remainer. Jeremy Corbyn leads a party which is half Remain, half exit, but having sat beside him in the House of Commons, literally for the most part, for almost 30 years, I know exactly what his real views are, and they are the same as mine, the same as our departed leader, Tony Benn. We are against the EU for Tony Benn's reasons, not for the reasons that UKIP and the far right are against it. Of course, we've lost some people along the way. You heard from one of them earlier. Some people have come to believe that the EU is a much better thing than they once thought and said it to be. But for the most part, it's my view that the majority of people in the country, a very big majority, believe that the Brexit decision is done, is dusted. In the cappuccino bars, there's still a lot of people crying into their macchiato about the decision, but most people have accepted that we are leaving the European Union, and the issue now is how and on what terms, but the decision in principle has been made. Now, I'm going to ask Jonathan to come back in, not least because I've perhaps traduced him. The Liberal Democrats are the only party in this election that are saying to people, vote for us, we'll stop Brexit. Even they're not quite saying that, but everybody knows that's what they mean. That's why a lot of people who Labour could formerly have counted on might well be going to vote Liberal Democrat in this election. So let me ask Jonathan, if I may. You're no longer at The Guardian, but their line is fairly clear. It's pretty full-on the issue of the EU. If Labour doesn't take your advice and have the kind of manifesto that you would like it to, will you vote Liberal Democrat?
No, I will continue to vote Labour, but I'll have to hold my nose.
Some of us have been doing that.
The point is, I think if the Labour Party were to follow my advice and come out strongly anti-Brexit, they would stop what may happen, which is a hemorrhaging of Labour voters to the Lib Dems and to the Greens, particularly among younger people. And so I think they would retain the votes. The fact that they did do badly in Copeland and Stoke, the two recent by-elections, was by then they were the pro-Brexit party. They didn't stop them losing votes. So your point earlier, when you said that if Labour came out strongly against Brexit, they'd lose a lot of votes, isn't necessarily true. They're losing votes anyway. I think they're going to win back their votes mainly on the core issues. Brexit isn't the only issue. They'll come in strongly, I think, as some of the other speakers have been saying, because they are really posing this as the election about are we going to have a country that only works for the few and not for the many? They're making that point all the time, that the party of the Conservatives is a privileged party, a party of the rich, party of the well-off, and it cares little about real investment in public services, hospitals, schools, social care and all the rest of it. So I think it's great that Jeremy Corbyn is out on the street really hammering this class kind of politics, which we haven't seen for a long time in British life. And that is good, and I think he will do well on that. But I think on the Brexit thing, he could actually prevent this hemorrhaging of some of his core vote to the Lib Dems and the Greens.
It would be a tremendous volte-face, though, wouldn't it? Because Labour said from the beginning that they would accept the decision of the referendum. It would be quite a rapid retreat from that to say, well, actually now we don't accept it.
Well, parties can change their minds, they're entitled to, and they do it democratically. So if they, as long as they put it in their manifesto, they're not doing it undercover and suddenly coming out if they win with a sort of stealth thing saying, by the way, we're now staying in the EU. They put it forward as part of the manifesto. It's democratically debated in the next 5 weeks of this campaign, and let's see what happens. I don't think it would be suicide. I think it's more likely to win votes than to lose them. But coming back to your other point about the EU, I mean, I'm not a great enthusiast for every aspect of the EU, but I think it's thanks to the EU that we have better environmental standards in this country, better standards of safety at work, better standards for women's rights, and of course the whole issue of climate change we can only tackle on an international level through institutions like the EU. I think if we stay out of the EU, we move to an isolationist position. It increased xenophobia in this country among, unfortunately, a considerable number of white English people who are very xenophobic, very racist, and this only encourages them. And it also means our foreign policy is all over the shop, and we're more likely to be pro-American even than we are now if we come out of the EU. Well, it's still possible, and I think you'll see it happening.
Okay. Steve Topple, one of the new generation. He's not yet distinguished because he's too young to be distinguished. But one day, my son will introduce him as the distinguished journalist, Steve Topple. Steve.
Thank you, George. I think the point the gentleman over there made was quite interesting about Tory infighting. I'm saying that we're not seeing it much. The reason we're not seeing it much is what you alluded to in your introduction, that we have a extremely biased media in this country. And I think it's important we touch on that. There was a report out just today from Reporters Without Borders, the people who do the International Press Freedom Index. The UK is now ranked 40th in the world for its press freedom. We're below countries like Uganda, Samoa, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, a lot of the former USSR countries, and this is going to play heavily on the general election. Corbyn is not going to get a fair crack at the whip, however much he may try. Just a few months ago, the esteemed London School of Economics released a report saying that the media had turned into an attack dog against Corbyn. The study they did showed that 75% of their reports gave no account of Corbyn's opinion at all when they were talking about Corbyn. And I think it was 56% if they did mention Corbyn's opinion on things, they neither quoted his voice nor an official statement from the party. And this is going to have a huge impact on the election. We see it with the BBC, as you rightly said already, and we see it across the press. He is going to be hammered by the mainstream media, and it's going to have a real impact, and it's something that his media team really need to get a handle on, if you like. His media team, I deal with them as well, and they are not always the quickest off the mark either. When the general election was announced, the Green Party was straight in there with an announcement, Liberal Democrats after them, and I was having to message his office saying, come on, you know, what's going on here? We need a statement. So media is going to play a massive role in this election, and I think it's going to be at Corbyn's detriment.
Well, of course, this is with the backdrop of a really sustained assault on the Labour leader, Corbyn, from the very day and hour of his election. Of course, they've been able to choreograph, and in some cases literally so, their attacks with internal Labour attacks and resignations and so on. You'll recall the day when, I can't remember the number, but it was dozens of Labour frontbench spokespeople resigned on the hour so that they could appear on Sky News and then go upstairs to BBC News to talk about their resignation. The 172 out of 225 Labour MPs who signed a motion of no confidence in Jeremy Corbyn, calling on him effectively to resign last summer. All of this has had the cacophony of publicity from almost all newspapers, including liberal newspapers like The Guardian, which actually has been the most damaging to Corbyn, precisely because it catered to the kind of people that Corbyn needs as his base. So the general election coverage is not going to be coming out of nowhere. It's just a stepping up of a propaganda onslaught. I've been in Uganda, and I'm not sure I can agree that the British press is even worse than the Ugandan, but it's been some years since I was in Uganda, so you might be right. To what extent, now you're a representative of the new media, some of us come from an era of the old media. To what extent, I mean, I saw Corbyn on Not For Radio, and the whole grime scene has really picked up Corbyn as a big favourite. To what extent can new media act as a balance to this cacophony of almost hatred against Corbyn in the rest of the media?
I think it is an important balance. I mean, if you look at Ofcom statistics, the press regulator in the UK, they said that 16% of people now get their news from either social media or the internet, and much of this new media is based around websites as opposed to print publications. That's the way it's going. I think the new media can do a lot. Myself, one of the websites I write for, we had nearly 750,000 unique readers on Monday alone of this week, which is quite a substantial amount of readers.
This is the
Canary.
How do people get it?
Thecanary.co. There we go. Yeah, so we already have quite a large readership, and I think they can do a very good job of countering it. What's hard to break through is still the control, if you like, that the television media, especially the BBC, have over the public, because there's no getting away from it. The BBC still has the monopoly on television news.
Well, not quite a monopoly. The BBC is number one, Sky is number two, but number three is now RT. It is amazing that RT has more people watching it than Channel 4 News or ITV News. It's a remarkable turnaround. So there's a bit of a fight back going on now.
Indeed, I'm on RT every couple of weeks, and they're, whatever people say about them, they're an extremely good station in the UK for countering what the rest of the media are saying, that kind of establishment, Western biased line. So, yes, there is a fight back happening, and I think it's especially tapping into the younger generation. I don't believe polling all the time. However, there was YouGov polling, a survey company in this country, out just today, which said that Corbyn's support below the under 40s is now more than the Tories. He is leading.
He's ahead of the Tories amongst everyone under 40, but particularly amongst women under 40.
Indeed, yes. It was a very interesting breakdown. But then the flip side of that is where Corbyn is now falling behind is in the lower socio-economic statuses. The Conservatives have overtaken the Labour Party in those who have no formal qualifications, and also in the lowest pay bracket in this country. So, I mean, if you believe the polls, it's a really complex situation. But I think, as you quite rightly said, new media can do a lot to change the debate now in the UK.
There's more of this after the break. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al-Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London, talking about the British general election. We took the كلمة camera onto the streets of London to hear what the people thought. Take a look.
Do you see this as a chance for Labour to recover its position?
I definitely do think that there's a chance, but just the general sense is that the global right has been really successful in the last year, and I'm a bit of a pessimist about it.
I don't think enough people have faith in Jeremy Corbyn as a leader. Like, I personally have faith in him as a politician, but as a leader, I don't think he could lead people out of a paper bag.
I think if they'd gone that they would go against Brexit, then they would have been, but because they haven't, then no.
Do you see this as a chance for Labour to recover its position?
No way.
Well, it's a chance for them to sort of understand how they want to organize themselves and what they want to sort of have as policies in the near future.
ايوه عشان نسبة الليبر ممكن تزيد فده برضو هيفيد يعني الكونتري هتبنفت والناس برضو كذلك هتبنفت.
After the election, I should think possibly if it's a landslide victory to the Conservatives, he's got to resign, hasn't he?
And would this election end the uncertainty in British politics after Brexit?
No, I don't think so. I think there's going to be quite a lot of uncertainty for the next 4 to 5 years.
I think it will continue. Like, there's still going to be a massive disillusionment with the young people and a lot of the working classes. So I think the disillusionment will still continue.
Probably not.
Not a lot of people are not interested in politics.
Maybe temporarily.
I think so, actually, because the Conservatives will secure their position because they're going to win, I think.
يعني أنا مش متأكد بصراحة بس يعني هو ممكن.
Very interesting. Let's continue the studio discussion. Yes, sir, the distinguished-looking gentleman in the front.
Thank you very much, George. I'm fond to follow up what Steve's talking about Corbyn and the media and the coverage that he's received. Why, given the opportunity to appear on national television in a live debate without Theresa May sharing the platform, has Corbyn decided not to appear on these programmes? This is an ideal opportunity for him to present his debate unmolested by her, with perhaps a second-tier official standing in for her party, MP appearing for her. This is his one chance to shine to the British public without a censor, without a filter. Who's advising him? What on earth is he doing? And can he not be persuaded to do this? This is a golden opportunity. This is right in front of goal to talk to the British nation and convince the people of his own worth as an electable person leading an electable party which will form a functioning and credible government. What's going on in his head?
First of all, I don't think it's officially been stated that he will not participate in the debates unless Theresa May does, but it's certainly been widely reported today that that's what they're leaning towards. I presume the argument would be that this would boost Farron and the Liberal Democrats. The debate would turn, instead of Labour versus the Conservatives, to Labour versus the Liberal Democrats, would expose further the kind of divisions. I mean, both Jonathan and I are voting, well, I'm not voting Labour because I'm a candidate, I'm voting for me, but if I were not a candidate, I'd be voting Labour. We both like Jeremy Corbyn. We have diametrically opposed views on the EU and on Brexit. That kind of division would be perhaps further exposed in a damaging way if Corbyn did agree to debate with the second tier. He is the leader of the opposition, leading 225 members of parliament. The Liberal Democrat leader leads a party of 8. And then there would be further complications because the nationalist party leaders, particularly the Scottish one, he might not fancy that dichotomy either. I don't know. I haven't spoken to anyone who is making this decision. I think it's perhaps a casualty of the fact that things are, on the face of it, going extremely badly. There's a poll this week showing the Tories on 40% in Wales, which they haven't achieved since the 1850s, not the 1950s, but the 1850s. In Scotland, in a way it's worse. The Nationalist Party is dropping as the Conservative Party rises. And the current polling in Scotland is 15 for Labour, 25 for the Conservatives, I can hardly believe I'm saying these words, and 45 for the Nationalists. So It's a very, someone used the word earlier, a very complicated, complex situation, and we'll have to see what happens with these debates. More importantly, I think, the media have entirely allowed Theresa May off the hook in her refusal to appear in these debates. If Macron and Le Pen can have a televised debate, if Trump and Clinton can have God knows how many televised debates, if Cameron could have a televised debate in the last general election, how can it just be tamely accepted that Theresa May, with this patrician wave, says, no thanks, I'm not interested in television debates? Can we go to the back gentleman who hasn't spoken yet?
Yeah, I heard you on the radio a couple of months ago talking about how much of a letdown Barack Obama was and a disappointment he was, and you had very high hopes for him back in 2007 and 2008, as did most people. So those people who do not know Jeremy Corbyn personally, how would you allay their fears that he could also... Not that I don't want to compare him. I mean,
depends when this show goes out.
Yeah. So, what could you say to them who might be just a bit pessimistic or paranoid?
I have known Corbyn for almost 40 years. Sat next to him in Parliament for almost 30 years. He's a good and honest man. I don't think even his worst enemies could credibly deny that, and that's not a small thing in an era where politics has been bankrupted by bad and dishonest men and women. Being authentic, sincere, steady, principled, good, honest, it's not a small thing, or at least oughtn't to be a small thing. I think he has many weaknesses. I think he has some policy weaknesses as well as some presentational weaknesses. He didn't get off to a good start. All this nonsense about poppies and ties and national anthems and how deeply you bow at the cenotaph. If I'd been the Labour leader, I would have bowed so low at the cenotaph, my head would have been touching my knees, because I would have known that they were measuring exactly that. They were watching to see if I sang the national anthem. They would have been waiting to see if I kissed the Queen's hand upon my acceptance of membership of the... All these cosmetic things that get you off to a bad start if you don't do them. I mean, I did say to him, when he was hesitating about whether to go and see the Queen and become a Privy Councillor, that every 5 years we pledge allegiance to Her Majesty and all her heirs and successors, however barmy they might turn out to be, in order to get our wages and our seat in the House of Commons. So if we can do that when we don't believe it, we can kiss the Queen's hand and we can sing the national anthem lustily, so lustily that no criticism would be heard. I think his performance in the House of Commons was poor in the beginning. I think it's gotten much better. I think his question time performances against Theresa May have been pretty good over the last few months, which is why the media has ceased to give much reportage to those clashes. But the one thing he's great at is what he's right now doing, which is campaigning on the streets, in all the cities, towns, villages in this country, coming face to face with people where sincerity, goodness, honesty counts. And where your opposition is helicoptering above you, waving, presumably, through the glass. And so there's still more than 40 days to go. And I don't believe myself that this election is a foregone conclusion. And I very much hope that it is not. Who hasn't spoken? In that case, back to the front bench.
I think what the Conservatives are doing at the moment is trying to fight this election on the ground of Brexit. Can I just draw the attention of people that supporting the idea of another referendum, that 2/3 of the constituency, and I speak from a little bit of experience, I'm a secretary of a constituency, 2/3 of the constituencies in Great Britain has voted for Brexit. So that straight away tells me something, that even with the Liberal Democrat strategy of targeting those minorities, because they are minorities if we're talking about constituencies, then the chances of them winning a great big number is somewhat diminished in my view. Equally for Labour, Labour cannot appear to be going against the tide, politically that is, given the fact that there is 2/3 of the constituencies have voted, and majority of them are Labour-held. Is it Kate Howe?
Kate Hoy.
Kate Hoy in Vauxhall. She is a Brexiteer, but 70% of her electorate have voted to remain. So you could see how complex, Steve has just mentioned that, the whole situation or the whole picture of Brexit issue and how it affects the parties. I think the Labour Party can be a little bit more positive about, as a Remainer, I'm talking about as a Remainer, can actually afford a little bit of a firm view about Europe to gain the confidence of the young people. But about, having a second referendum, I think, as you quite rightly pointed out, the example of Scotland and so on and so forth, it is not an option that is open for any political party to safely say that, yes, we will campaign strongly on that. And I think the Liberal Democrat will not be as successful as people predicting.
Well, of course, I agree with most of that, but I enter these caveats partly as devil's advocate, but partly also because I'm certain that they are true. The relative turnouts in referenda and general elections are very different. So the Scottish referendum had almost everybody who wasn't dying out to vote for it. The general election will have 65, tops 70% turnout. And ditto the EU referendum. Almost everybody voted in the EU referendum, which is one of the reasons why I think its decision is sacrosanct, at least in the foreseeable future. Someone could run for office in a general election saying my policy is to take us back into the European Union. That's perfectly proper, and if they won, they would have a right to do it. But that's a different matter. The SNP in Scotland, the Nationalist Party, the Separatist Party, they proved that if you can get everyone who believes one thing to vote for just one party, you can win almost all the seats. You see, the SNP won 56 out of 59 Scottish parliamentary seats in 2015, even though only 50% of the people voted for them. But because everyone who supported Scottish independence voted just for the SNP, never mind their other allegiances, and maybe only just once, because I think they're going to lose a lot of these seats, you can get quite a decisive parliamentary lurch in your favour. So in the absence of Labour taking the Jonathan Steele route and changing their position on Brexit, the Liberal Democrats will be the Brexit party, the Remain party in the general election. And in many places, that will give them the seat because Labour supporters, Conservative Remainers, will vote for them, perhaps just once, but to affect the EU outcome. So my prediction is the Liberal Democrats will go up from 8, perhaps to as many as 40. They will make very significant gains.
Optimistic.
They'll make, well, it's not optimistic, I hate them. It's nothing optimistic about it. It's my psephological instinct over many decades in politics that the Liberal Democrats will win back many of the seats that they formerly lost because other parties' supporters will vote for them to deliver a message to the Conservatives, particularly on Brexit.
You invite me after the election. You invite me so we can have that discussion.
What? Because I gamble on politics, I shouldn't be giving away my predictions, because my spread bets keep me going for 5 years at a time. Let's wait, Steve, and take it in the next segment, because what you've got to say is always of such importance. Thanks very much indeed. We'll be right after that. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, coming to you from London, discussing the British general election, which is on June the 8th. Very spirited discussion and many different trends here present in this studio audience. This young man, watch out for him, Steve Topple of the Canary. He's going to be big in years to come. Go ahead, Steve.
I just wanted to come in on the point about the Liberal Democrats. I agree completely with George's analysis. If you look at, there was leaked private polling done by the master of Western spin, Linton Crosby, for the Conservative Party, which says that 27 Tory seats could be under threat from the Liberal Democrats. We have former MPs Vince Cable, Simon Hughes and Julian Hubbard all saying they're going to stand, and they're standing in constituencies where the Tory majority over the Lib Dems was 2,000, 2,500 and 600 seats. Really slim majorities. So I agree. I think the Lib Dems are sort of the ones to watch, if you like, in this election and should be wary of. But that point brings us, if you like, onto another important one, which I think is going to be made. Post-election, if the Tories don't get a majority, which is a possibility with the Liberal Democrat threat, what is going to happen? Because we've already had Tim Farron, the Liberal Democrat leader, saying he will not do a coalition with Labour. He will not do a coalition with the Tories. The latter, I believe, he's probably being slightly deceptive on, given the Lib Dems' track record. The SNP have currently not really made any overtures towards Labour themselves. So, George, I mean, what is the makeup going to be? If we see a minority Conservative win, what is going to happen? Because that, for me, is a distinct possibility of an outcome of this election.
Well, of course, I hope that the Tories fail to get an overall majority and that the other parties can block them returning to government. In those circumstances, Theresa May, who was not actually elected as the Conservative leader, didn't face the membership in a proper election. She effectively was the last person standing and therefore got the job. There would presumably be a challenge to her, and instability would be everywhere in the British political system. That's what I hope for. It's what I wish for, but it's not what I believe is going to happen. What I believe is going to happen is that the Conservatives will win a big victory. Of course, polls are not always right, but they'd have to be more wrong on this than they've ever been on anything. And the media doesn't always decide what happens. The Donald Trump victory that was talked about earlier was achieved in the face of all the US media, none of whom were supporting Donald Trump's candidacy. But the combination of the polls, the media, and the state of total disarray inside the Labour Party. I mean, I'm doing hustings with my rival candidates. It's good fun, I really like it. If you were fighting against a Labour MP who had voted no confidence in Jeremy Corbyn just months ago and had said on every media that would have you that Jeremy Corbyn was the worst thing ever to happen to British Labour politics, and now you're standing for election to put Jeremy Corbyn into number 10 Downing Street, you can see the disarray that that produces. The rival candidates just have to produce the quotes. You said last summer that Jeremy Corbyn was a dead man walking, a political zombie, a throwback to the 1970s and so on. But now you're asking us to vote for you, and he's your leader, so he'd be going into Downing Street. You can see the potential for chaos down on the ground, and all politics in the end is local. You've got to win your local battle. I believe the Conservatives are going to win a big majority. I don't believe that, by the way, that Jeremy Corbyn will then resign. I don't believe that Jeremy Corbyn will resign until the Labour conference changes the rules for the selection of his successor, because otherwise you get a Blairite leader forever more. And I think he'd be right to seek to hold on and preside over that historic change so that people could run for the leadership without having to get the wholly invented level of support of 40 MPs. So that's my prediction. I've got my money where my mouth is at the bookmakers, but I'm not going to give you the exact numbers that I've got because it'll affect the odds. Jonathan, can I ask you, as we're both old-timers, Labour leaders have I joined the Labour Party when Harold Wilson was the leader. He was savagely traduced constantly in the media, as was James Callaghan, as was Michael Foot very famously or infamously, as was Neil Kinnock. John Smith might have been a brief interregnum. Tony Blair got the support of the media because he was actually leading Labour in the opposite direction to its historic purpose. Miliband got a very, very rough time of the media. Do you see the treatment of Corbyn as just a continuum, or is there something special about the venom against Corbyn?
I think there is something special. I mean, you're right that the media completely traduced Gordon Brown when he ran in 2010.
I forgot him, yeah.
Ed Miliband, 2015. They would have traduced Owen Smith had he by some miracle won the leadership contest last year. So that's all predictable. But I think there is a particular venom against Corbyn because, after all, he is on the left of the party. He's much further to the left even than Miliband and certainly than Gordon Brown or Owen Smith. So they don't like that because he talks about renationalising the railways. He talks about government investment and national investment banks and so on. I think for Scotland he wants a Scottish investment bank, and this sort of thing is running against the trend of neoliberal Washington consensus economics and globalisation that we've all been told, to which there's meant to be no alternative. Thatcher said, Tina, there is no alternative. But Corbyn is the alternative, so it's Tia, there is an alternative. And Corbyn reflects it, and that's, I think, why the media is particularly against him, the mainstream media.
Would you be prepared to make a prediction about how the British general election is going to go?
I think I'm more inclined to go with Steve than with you. I think that Tories may have, could still snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, at least snatch a minority government, in which case you would get a potential alliance, which I would call a progressive alliance of the Scottish National Party, Labour, Lib Dems and Greens, who would hold the majority in Parliament. I mean, of course, each party leader has to say, I would never go into coalition with these people, because that looks as though you're not running for victory. You clearly want to say, I want an outright victory. But I think when the election is over and you see what the mathematics, the arithmetic is, who's got what seats, what the numbers are exactly, you can't totally rule out a progressive alliance and the Tories facing defeat.
Now, you were Jonathan, just one more thing, if I may. You were for many years one of our most distinguished foreign correspondents. Is there something about Corbyn's foreign policy that has earned him this venom? Is it his historic support for the Palestinian people, for example, his opposition to the Iraq war, which was absolute and complete, He's not speaking about it much, but I can promise you he's not in love with NATO and with nuclear weapons and so on. Is this a special reason for the venom?
Yes, I think that is also a reason, apart from these class issues that I mentioned. I think the foreign policy is right. I mean, let's face it, that when Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the party 2 years ago, he was the most well-informed leader person who'd ever become leader of one of the two main parties that there's ever been, far more informed than David Cameron was when he became Prime Minister, or when Tony Blair was, or even Margaret Thatcher, or anybody, because he'd spent 25 years going around the world helping liberation movements. I first came across him most of our viewers probably don't even know where these places are, Nicaragua and El Salvador, because they dropped right out of the headlines. But he was there supporting those liberation movements against US capital and US power in Latin America. He supported the anti-apartheid movement in the times when Margaret Thatcher was saying Nelson Mandela's a terrorist. He was supporting the Kurds. I was recently in the Kurdish areas of Syria, and people said, "How's Jeremy doing?" And I said, "Jeremy, how do you know about Jeremy?" He said, "Well, he comes to every march that the Kurds ever have in England." So he's incredibly well informed, but he supports these popular movements, these liberation struggles, which are on the left, and that's why he is demonized.
Brother.
I'd like to say a few things with all the respect to these gentlemen who made very good points. I think the Labour took the country to war 5 times. I think we might like the leader of the Labour as an individual, but as a party, I think there are no good records for the party itself. The most devastating wars this country have engaged took place during the war. One thing I believe would happen, there is so much irritation. Many people are irritated by the behavior and the conduct of the Conservatives. And I have seen some of the negative experience people had with the party and its policies. There could be, it is just like a boxing game where there may be a sudden and unexpected knockout. Nobody has total assurances of anything. I think this party is not a party that is going to lead this country into a good direction, and I think something may happen from the middle class and those others. Labour's reliance on London is not going to help. I think the worry is the rise of nationalism in Scotland, which is damaging this party, and they haven't done anything on the ground to win the hearts and minds of unionists. The unionist vote, as I said earlier, have gone completely to the Conservatives. What I wanted to say is that, the problem Labour is experiencing when it comes to foreign policy, unless the unknown and the big Satan who dictates things agrees with you, if you act independent of those satanic philosophies, you will be in trouble. He is a victim of those satanic philosophies. He is a man, as you mentioned at the beginning, who lives by the rights and wrongs. Means he's totally a victim of those unseen forces. He's punished for that, and I think I'm very sad that some of the MPs have deserted him simply because not what he did, but who he was. Now, I think he was a man for the right things. So let us see what happens in the election.
Well, there is no doubt that Tony Blair is out of office, but he's not out of power, that he commands the allegiance of a very significant number of Labour members of Parliament. He commands the allegiance of a large part of the Labour Party's machinery, its decision-making machinery, its execution of policy, the national executive and so on. These are still as they were under the Blair era. Mr. Blair has come back into politics with a very large amount of money behind him. There's no doubt that the irreconcilables inside the parliamentary Labour Party would rather Labour lost the election than for Jeremy Corbyn to win it. Although I add the caveat, as long as they themselves don't lose their seats. It's one consolation for me that any seats they do lose are likely to be theirs. But the Conservatives are driving on with a mass media engine underneath them, propelling them, And it just seems to me that all the stars are aligned for another Conservative victory. I hope that I'm wrong, but I fear that I'm right. This has been كلمة on Al Mayadeen Television. It's good night to you from the audience here in London.